Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is Anora Wang. Today, I have the pleasure of having a special appearance of a host and also speaker. Joining me today as a co-host is Clémence Coppin, who is also joining us with a collaboration from the New York State Bar Association, and she is going to do the honor to introduce our special speaker. Clémence, to you.
Hi, Anora. I would love to introduce our speaker today. So our guest today is Blanche Savary de Beauregard, General Counsel at Mistral AI. Blanche has extensive experience in the legal and business worlds. Blanche, you started your career at Cleary and then Skadden before moving in-house. You first went to Ledger, where you served as a tax director and then M&A tax and customs. Then you joined DNA Script as the general counsel and secretary to the board. Blanche also co-founded the Comet Business Club, which supports female managers in France. Welcome, Blanche.
Thank you very much, Clémence and Anora. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the strategic scrutiny of AI partnerships by antitrust authorities globally. And I'll have Clémence to kick off the conversation.
Thank you, Anora. So, Blanche, to set the stage and before we delve into the details of today's conversation, can you help us and can you help our audience understand where Mistral AI fits in the broader AI ecosystem, and particularly, for example, in foundation models and enterprise AI solutions?
Sure, that's a short and long story. So Mistral has been born in 2023, so not so long ago. And we've started with making top-notch models, large language models. And this is how we became a name. And we open-sourced them. That was also part of our DNA and still is. So from then, we expanded from models making to also the applicative layers to serve them. And then we also expanded across the value chain, let's say, into making compute to serve them and to train them. So that's a bit of the story of Mistral. Maybe a few figures, because it illustrates also how fast this ecosystem and this market evolves. 2 years and a half ago, when I joined in November 23, I was a 20th employee. Today, we're approaching the 800 number, and we've been born in France, and we are headquartered in France, which is our primary market, obviously. But we also now have offices pretty much across the world, because we have offices West Coast, East Coast in the US. We have offices across Europe, and we have our Asian headquarters in Singapore. So a long and short story.
And in terms of the full stack story of AI, right? Like in terms of how to understand the supply chain, or how do you, the industry structure, where does Mistral AI, or I would just say Mistral AI, so that like the English speakers can understand that easily. Where does your company compete in terms of the layers in the full stack?
So, where do we compete? So we obviously compete on models, and on this, I'd say that the main players are in the USA and in China. And we are model makers. We were born that way. And we also compete on serving them. And by serving them, I mean making applicative layers and also adapting them to our customers. Because one of our key differentiators here is that, and that's part of being open source and of our DNA, which is we make pretty open models in the sense that our customers are free to adapt them, fine-tune them, customize them. And also we are very open to having them use our stack internally, have it on-prem, for instance, have it portable on the cloud of their choice. And we also help them doing so. Actually, we have a team of applied engineers that help them adapt and adjust the models to their strategy, to their needs, and to their stack. So this is how we play in. We are mostly on the B2B segment of this market, which is also one of the key differentiators. We really focus on unlocking the value of AI for real use cases of our customers, like logistic use cases, R&D use cases, and any other real type use case we see with our customers.
That's very helpful. And Mistral AI has been also all over the news lately. In recent weeks, I guess, or like, in the past couple months, we've seen that the company completed its first acquisition with Koya, a startup providing high-performance serverless infrastructure. And a few days, I guess, also not too long ago, Mr. I also announced your plan to invest over $1 billion into digital infrastructure in Sweden, including the construction of an AI-focused data center. So what are the competitive implications of all these actions or movement that Mr. AI is making? And specifically, where do companies like Mr. AI need to build additional strength, I guess, to compete with rivals across multiple layers?
That's a very big question. I'd start by saying we were very proud with those recent announcements, and there's going to be more. And this is very illustrative of how ambitious and fast you need to be on this market. Because a company that didn't exist 3 years ago is investing billions in European infrastructure. And is also doing a size of M&A that is not usual for a company this age. And I think this is something very important for the rest of the discussion to have in mind. And what's at play here? I'd say a few things, including the fact that we've announced back in June that we would do compute, that we would work towards making available infrastructure and not models and the rest of the value chain, let's say. So we would come upward the value chain. And just a few months later, we are announcing that we acquire a very interesting company with a very interesting stack that's helping us accelerate on this. And also we're acquiring a team of people that's going to integrate our teams and bring a lot of value to them. So that's what's at play here beyond the euros investment in this. It's to unlock things in this market. You need to be very fast into getting the inputs, and the key inputs here that are at play in those two events you mentioned are getting very, very smart and rare, let's say, people for this industry, because it's a new market, so the talents are rare. Getting them fast. So if you do the traditional hiring way, how do you get to 800 people in 2.5 years, as I mentioned? So you need to find ways to accelerate this and be strong and important before the traditional way of hiring people. And you also, of course, need to do big investments in the infrastructure, because compute is a scarce resource in this market. It's pretty difficult to get compute orders with a size that help you develop your models and also that help your customers. So one of the key topics of interest is to help our customers deploy also in a secure way and controlled way. So if compute is rare and we want to unlock that for our customers because it's important to them, then we need to invest into this compute, and that's a big amount for sure. So that's also triggers maybe the need to mention a third resource that is also very scarce and very important on this market, which is money. So that's maybe the elephant in the room, but that's a market that's unusual for the size of investment it requires.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Blanche. And relatedly, we were wondering, how does Mistral think about competing in a market where some rivals are significant in multiple layers of stack?
That's obviously something that is very specific to this market, which is there are not much pure players. And the main players, even if they are not the most vocal on this, the main players are in fact hyperscalers in some way or another. So hyperscalers have this particularity of being integrated across the value chain. They have the inputs, especially the inputs that I mentioned. They have them. They have the capacity to deploy compute. They have it, actually. They have the capacity to deploy dollars very, very fast. They have the capacity to hire teams very, very fast, and they have some of them. So, of course, they are key incumbents on this market. And the thing is, we players, other players, are also very, very dependent on them. So we have to partner with them. And some of those partnerships are super beneficial for the market, by the way. But we do have to partner with them. And one of the reasons for it is they also have the access to most customers, because most customers would consume AI on the cloud. And the cloud is owned by the same. So I would say those players are very interesting to have a look at, because you have to work with them.
And thank you for earlier explaining the layers and sort of the complication of the landscape. But in the space where Mistral AI competes, where do you see as the most significant barriers to entry, or maybe difficulties preventing you from scaling, sitting here today in early of 2026?
So all the inputs that I mentioned have their barriers to entry. So in a way, this market is a difficult one from that standpoint. And I would say that from Europe, it's amplified, because most of those inputs are more difficult to access in Europe, which is also an opportunity, which is what we saw as a very interesting angle for our strategy. Because if you think about problems as opportunities, the fact that Europe lacks clouds, lacks compute, is also an opportunity. And having a foot in a part of this market also unlocks the opportunity to other parts of this market, which serves our customers, which also want the same. They want more autonomy, more control over their stack, and this is where we can all play into these difficulties and take them as opportunities. So I would say the main thing to unlock, if you think about new entrants and about Mistral as an example of that, is how do you start the wheel? Because starting the wheel is the main problem. And to start the wheel, I have no secret recipe for anyone, but I'm looking backward at the story, I would say that having 3 founders that were big names with a very coherent story and a very huge ambition was instrumental to unlock and start the wheel. And then, of course, each and every step has its challenges and difficulties and risks. But then from that, you can see the rest as a lot of opportunities. So I would say on those entrants where you have talents, cash, compute, you have to start somewhere. We started with talent and we managed to unlock the rest. So I guess there is a place for new startups to do the same.
We also noticed, Blanche, that Mistral AI recently pursued many partnerships, and including important partnerships with industrial and tech players. Last September, for instance, we know that the semiconductor company ASML invested 1.3 billion euro into Mistral AI, taking an 11% stake. So we were wondering if you could please explain why companies like Mistral AI pursue these types of partnerships and how these collaborations fit into long-term competitive and technological strategy of companies like Mistral?
Yes, that partnership I think is a very interesting one and was seen as very strategic by both parties. We spent the summer on it, and we are now working together because part of this partnership that you didn't mention, Clémence, is that we are also having ASML as a customer. So we are unlocking the power of AI for them in some of them very industrial and very high-tech use cases, which triggers some very interesting discussions because we are uniting their scientists and ours on some of the most difficult problems, and I think everybody's having a lot of fun in doing this. So that's part also of the partnership, and I'd say starting with that part, I'd say is interesting because what that means is ASML entrusts, which is the established European tech per se, because they are, I think, the most important tech company in Europe, and having a worldwide reach. They are working across every continent, so the most established European tech with the most ambition is partnering with the youngest and still starting to be big tech in Europe. And what that means to me is Europe is putting trust into Europe. And that's not happening. That's not happened so much in the past. I think something is changing there. And we've seen that movement amplify since then. So I'd say this is what I take from this deal. And also what's interesting is we are at each extreme of the value chain, let's say, and we made the same, we had the same conclusion and starting points that we could not be satisfied with Europe only controlling the extremes of the value chain, where 80% of the stack is abroad. And we want to participate and have European companies participate in rebuilding it. And by saying this, I'm not just putting a European message, a European-centric message, because I think what this says is we want to export European tech. And this message resonates beyond Europe, of course, because some of our biggest contracts, for instance, are in Singapore or in the USA. And the same message to bring something that gives a means to empower customers, to have them control the stack, to have them have the means of their strategic independence. This same message resonates worldwide. So that's what I find interesting with this partnership.
So, Blanche, in particular, is there an element of building EU tech sovereignty that influences how partnerships are structured by companies like Mistral AI? To what extent do partnerships align with broader European industrial or defense strategies? So
I say that Europe is certainly our anchor market. This is where we have our headquarters. There is a huge alignment of values. So I'd say this is where we come from. And of course, there is a huge critical need in Europe, more than on certain continents, to rebuild some sort of strategic independence, and we can serve that purpose. So this market really echoes some of our key strengths, especially in the regulated industries. So that's why we have such a success in Europe. But this success, again, goes beyond Europe, because I think it's not just a question of sovereignty, of European sovereignty. It's more a question of having a very successful European tech that can export as successfully, I would say.
That makes sense. But since we are in the antitrust bar, we are concerned about competition issues. Collaborations naturally is drawing some attention, especially when it involves data sharing, compute access, or strategic investment. So from authorities, competition authorities around the world, there may be some concerns or common grounds for focusing on these collaborations. From where you sit, Blanche, do you see some common themes or grounds that you have observed in these enforcers, I guess, concern or focus on collaborations?
So interestingly, I discovered, that was one of the first topics I discovered by working in AI. And the way I discovered it is interesting. We were doing our Series A when I arrived in November 23. And a few weeks later, I received a notification from the UK authorities investigating on the fact that Microsoft was investing a very, very minimal amount. And by the way, in convertible bonds, so not even in shares, in Mistral AI share capital. And the questions were implying that the CMA was fearing we would somehow be controlled by for the reasons we had certain relationships with Microsoft, which you could call a partnership in your classification. And that was not just this investment, which again was minimal, but the fact that, of course, we were buying compute from Azure, like everybody does, because this is a very good source of compute. And again, it's a scarce resource. So when you can buy it, you're happy. And that was kind of the relationship that the CMA was fearing. We could be losing our independence. So long story short, we were not at all losing any sort of independence. And we very easily demonstrated it to the authorities. But I think what that shows is there is a scrutiny. And it's interesting that some of the authorities are more cautious into assessing those partnerships and have more understanding or not on the fact that you can't not do partnerships in this market. If you're not doing partnerships in this market, you just don't exist because the inputs are so intricate. The competing notion even doesn't make the same sense it does in certain industry. It's not that obvious who's competing with who's and you're competing with someone, but you're still partnering with them on something else. And this is what's happening if it becomes difficult to partner in this market because there are too many investigations on partnering in this market. It just discourages partnering, and it has the reverse effect the authorities are looking at because it just kills emerging company, which will not be able to emerge if they don't partner with incumbents, other companies, and other potential partner with, of course, a notion of competing with your partners, but if everybody is smart in the way doing it, this is the only way to have new players emerge, frankly. So I would say on all the inputs you mentioned, there are sorts of partnerships. Of course, the authorities will look at them. Of course, they will ask questions. But I would say my personal take of this experience and others is that it is super important to be cautious in the way those are investigated, even if it's going so fast that I understand the authorities want to investigate fast, because otherwise they may lose the opportunity to investigate at all. So that's a very complex discussion, honestly.
And this discussion is shared between so many competition authorities at the moment. We know that it's at the heart of the European Commission's concerns these days, and they are closely monitoring AI and AI-related markets. We noticed that you were invited by the DG Comp a few days ago, the DG competition in Brussels, to speak about Mistral's position in the review of the merger guidelines by the European Commission. So in that context, what would a company like Mistral AI expect from the EU in evaluating AI partnerships going forward?
Yeah, we were very glad to be invited and have an opportunity to give an opinion and a very business-minded opinion. And I will give it here, which is, I think, in a few words. We at Mistral strongly believe that Europe needs more champions and more, and we don't see, at least in the AI market, we don't see the possibility for champions that don't scale fast, because this is the rule of this market, really. So we strongly advocate for rules to encourage big champions able to scale fast, to emerge on our market and on every market, because what is true for AI is true for our customers. If we want to emerge and grow, we need our customers to emerge, grow, and be as able as possible to do big orders, big AI orders, so that we can also grow. And I'll give a very specific example of that, which is if you want to target European logistics markets, it's very fragmented. You have to target maybe 1, 2, 3 champion for 27 countries and more, if you count beyond the European Union. If you want to target the same in the USA, I guess with 5 logistics big company, you have the same, if not bigger, revenue than what you would get with 27 per 3 companies in Europe. So what I'm saying is that scaling in Europe is more difficult in terms of spending in forces, sales forces, in terms of time spent, time to market, let's say. So that's what's happening in Europe. So with this simple example, I think what we are saying is we need European scale to allow for less fragmented of a market in any manner possible. That's also true for the controlling side. So you were mentioning there are a lot of authorities. I was mentioning CMA. In Europe, you could have questions from 27 authorities on the very single discussion of competition, and sometimes on the very same operation. And that's frankly difficult to sustain for an emerging company. So that's the kind of message we were sending through. And maybe in line with the one I mentioned with partnership, here we're discussing mergers, but the same message is true. I guess I know the authorities have to control, and this is to the benefits of the markets, but I also sense that intervention, especially in the merger sector, can also have adverse effects as the one compared to the one looked at. And I'll just talk about one, which is investors need a perspective of exit. We need money. We need investors. So if even theoretically investors don't think of us as being able to resell, to offer a market to resell their shares, that's a difficult investment for them to make. So for us, it's theoretical because it's not the objective, but still, it's the laws of investment that investors won't invest if the perspective is that there's going to be control at every corner, at every partnership, at every acquisition, at every stage. They will invest if the rules of the game are clear and they know exactly what to expect from their investment and the growth they can expect from it. And that's also very important for the market to be vivid, because if they can sell, they can reinvest in another company, and that's important for new emerging champions to exist and grow fast.
Thank you for sharing that very candid, business-minded opinion. Since we are talking about mergers, so one of the particular issues that we want to talk about is below-threshold transactions. That's increasingly caught by competition authorities. For instance, the NVIDIA Run AI transaction in Italy. And then there are now, calling powers being asserted by authorities. I think France recently announced that it would adopt such powers soon as well. So what do you think of, I guess, this sort of development or trend in merger control, and what does that mean for AI companies?
So maybe two things on this. Of course, relating to my previous points, the risk I see with that vision is the lack of visibility and legibility around the rules. So if the thresholds are unclear and the rules are unclear, and especially if there can be ex post controls, then it's going to be more difficult for startups to reassure investors, as a matter of fact. So that's one of the remarks that I have on this. And the other one is that I think Europe is thinking about Europe in too much of a fragmented way, again, because if you think of European markets as a market, I know there are some nuances, and I know that on some specific markets you have to analyze differently, but still, as a general remark, in the USA, you don't analyze things in a fragmented way, and de facto, the thresholds are bigger. Why would we, Europe, shoot in our foot by stating rules that disadvantage our champions to perceive them as potentially sizable champions, able to compete worldwide with US champions, Chinese champions, and others? So I think I wouldn't want Europe to diminish its own vision of itself by putting into the rules thresholds that don't reflect our ambitions.
I think that's very, very important, and I think it reflects some key concerns that AI companies have across jurisdictions. I think our discussion already tread closely to this, which is the concept of national security. We already talked about, like, Europe putting interest in Europe, right? And then sort of like, you want to think about, like, where your core markets or where you come from. And the concept of national security, I guess it increasingly overlaps with the technology and competition enforcement now. So, and for instance, I guess, like, in the NVIDIA ARM deal in the UK as example, but what is that dynamic influencing, I guess, global AI partnerships today, as you have seen?
So I haven't seen yet a concrete influence of this, but on a general stance, I would say in the gaming theory, what you described would be characterized as totally suboptimal, because if each and every country, beyond competition rules that are quite generally harmonized to some extent, which are supposedly rules of the game worldwide, which each and every country beyond that implements rules that are refragmenting everything, and that are also very difficult to read, because I've never met a lawyer in any country that was able to tell me what were the rules of this game in their country. Generally, what they would say is, you never know until you've asked the authorities. We don't have much precedence. So here, total lack of legibility and total suboptimal game, because, again, investors could be concerned by this major unknown in their potential exit. Luckily enough, I've never seen that be a problem. So I hope it remains the case, and I hope those rules remain relatively quiet.
We'll see what happens, I guess. And in terms of competition authorities, and if we were able to speak to them today, so we know that, as we mentioned earlier, competition authorities around the world focus more closely on AI markets. What should they keep in mind about the realities of entry, innovation and scaling in the sector of AI, and in particular in the context of partnerships?
So I think the first thing they should keep in mind is the complexity of this market, because of course each and everybody is doing a bit of everything. Also, the agility and how fast it evolves of this market was what was true a year ago is no longer true. And next month, you could have many companies pivot before you notice it. So that's maybe the second thing to be aware of, which is you are never well aware of what's happening because it's changing every day. So this requires, of course, an intense work of understanding this market and updating one's understanding. And maybe because of that, and the fact that certain actors are more able than others to be agile, pivot, adjust, control whatever portion of the market, or maybe all of them, every dynamic could, so the foreclosure could occur super fast. So I'm conscious that what I'm saying contradicts a bit my call for being cautious in investigating this market, because that could really kill innovation and disallow scale, which is one of the important components of existing of this in this market, being able to scale fast. So this is why competition authorities have all my respect, because at the same time, they have to be super well aware of everything and check that this market is not closed, which could happen super fast, and be very, very cautious and measurate in the way they do their investigation, because it could have exactly the adverse effect they are trying to protect.
Well, thank you, Blanche. This has been a wonderful conversation. We have learned a lot, and and thank you for speaking your opinions candidly, and we're very much appreciative of that. Before we wrap up, sort of as a tradition of our Curious Amalgam, we usually want to give our audience an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you as a person as well. So would you please tell us maybe just one thing that people would not know if they had only known you professionally? What would that one thing be?
So I guess now everybody knows I'm not a competition lawyer because I've had very candid and business-minded opinions about competition law. But joke aside, thanks for having shared this question with me, and thanks for having shared it ahead of this discussion, which gave me an opportunity to prepare the answer. To be very honest with you, I was totally... was having no idea about an answer to give. So I asked one of my daughters this morning in the hope that she would find something extraordinary about me. So I candidly asked her, Garance, I have no idea to answer this question later today. She's a teenager, which will give a light on the question, on the answer she gave. So they want me to tell something not usual about me. And the answer was, oh, Mama, you're totally mainstream. So I'm totally mainstream. The only thing I could answer to you about that is more professional than personal this time. It is that I think something unusual about me is I don't come from where you expect from, in the sense that I've started studying literature, then I've done philosophy, and only afterwards I studied law, and I started with tax law, and then I became a tech lawyer. So I'd say what's probably a bit unusual about my background is I love to think that you can start from anywhere and become a tech lawyer after you've been a philosopher and not studying math at school. So that's something I think we should be very open-minded with our background. It brings a lot to an organization, a company, to be an outsider, let's say.
And that makes you anything but mainstream. Thank you.
My daughter.
Thank you so much, Blanche, for today and for this discussion. And we look forward to see what the future holds for Mistral AI. Thank you again.
Very much. Thanks both for having me. Thanks, Anora and Clémence.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking, and thank you, audience, for tuning in for more discussion on AI, competition, and I guess competition in general. Tune in for more programming for our Curious Amalgam. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.